All right, back again, Luke here. And today, as you can see in front of you, we have out another mystery box. Or probably, after looking at the title here, it's not much of a mystery, but this is a package that just came in here. And as you can see by the title, this is a Super Hang-On PCB. And this is one that is also not working, so I figured we could go ahead and see if we could get this running. It's another classic Sega arcade game, and one that I also do not have. So, let's see here. This is excellent packaging. It'll take a little bit of work to get this thing out. Got some cardboard, more paper, more paper. I don't know if you can see it's here. Quite a lot of good packaging for this one, and you can see this also has some excellent bubble wrap to it as well. So we'll go ahead and open this thing up. I'm not sure exactly what's wrong with it, but I know it does not start. So it doesn't really help out a whole lot with the board details, but it's just not working. There are so many layers to this this bubble wrap. This is going to take a couple seconds to undo. Apologies in advance. Just excellent packaging here. And again, one more layer of, of bubble wrap. We'll eventually get there, I suppose. And once again, finally we have the bag. Right. And as you can see, or maybe you can see, here is our PCB. Now, one thing you can notice right off the bat is it looks like someone has tried to do a bit of some work to this one. Has a couple of bodge wires there, and this is, you can see up there in the corner, Super Hang-On, but this is one of those games that requires the, what is it, the FD109296. It has the encrypted CPU, and this one doesn't look to have that. So I'm guessing that someone tried to, and in fact, if you look here, it looks like someone tried to maybe change out the ROMs here. I'm not sure. But normally, if you change this out and you put in a regular CPU, you have to change out these ROMs in order for the game to work. So I'm not sure if someone has already attempted this or not, but it does look like somebody's been in here trying to get this thing to work. Overall, the board looks pretty clean. It doesn't look too bad. In fact, this is interesting because if you look here, this is that same IC that I was needing for my rail chase. There's the coincidence right there. I suppose I could have used that if I needed it, but yeah, it was just another project that I saw here that looked like it might be fun to try and get up and run again. Let's take a look at the bottom part of the board. Looks like a few of the pins here are bent. Several different places, but a couple of things we'll need to do is test out, make sure that looks a bit, it's a pretty big blob of solder there. Test out and make sure that no pins are touching, and make a wire harness for this, because this uses the similar kind of harness as what Rail Chase uses, so I'll need to make something for that. And then we'll go over and make sure that there's good, make sure all of these, wow, these legs are really, really long here, but make sure that there's nothing shorting out on the board before we apply power to it. It just always surprises me about how long these legs can be and how close they can be to other components and not short out. Another thing about this is you'll notice it has this TMM RAM here, which is notorious for shorting out or internally shorting out, which I'm guessing is probably what happened here. Either that or else someone tried to remove it from the bottom part and wound up breaking some traces on it. But that's where we're at with this board here. You can see it doesn't look too bad, but apparently it's just not running. So we're going to have to go ahead and take a look at this and see what we can figure out. But that's where we're at as of right now. So going around the board here, I've separated the top from the bottom half, but as you can see, it's always a good idea to do some preliminary inspection, especially if you can see around here, or where is it? Here. These are a few pins that are bent over and touching other components, and there's a whole row of them here. Just before you decide to power something on like this, go ahead and make sure that these pins on your board are not touching anywhere. There were several pins that I've come across so far that were bent over and touching, but these ones here, those need to be bent back up. And the other row that I had before here, is it maybe this one as well? But I'm going to keep going across this one, and my suspicions were correct on the other board here, and that was that the previous person had decided or tried to replace the RAM on the board, which is why those jumper wires were there. This is the RAM section, and you can see that there is quite a lot of flux, quite a lot of solder there. In fact, some of these look like they're pretty iffy. The one thing about Sega PCBs is that they are just so difficult to desolder components from. So it's almost one of those things where you either have to apply a lot of hot air to it to try to get them out, or in best case scenario, if they're just something simple and easy to come by, just to cut them out and then pull the legs out, as I did on the rail chase PCB. Because unfortunately, if not, you'll find yourself having this kind of issue, which can be really tricky down the line trying to repair, because these traces here and the pads that are underneath them are so fragile that one or two of them, if they're broken on one side and they don't make a complete connection, you'll wind up having graphic glitches, or you'll have like all sorts of problems with it. But right now, that's what we're doing. I need to go back to that previous board here and try to fix those pins wherever they were. Well, after bending all those pins on the bottom of the board and checking the top here, it looks like everything else seems to be okay. There doesn't seem to be anything else that's interfering with anything else. The pins and the rest of the components look like they're okay. They're not really touching anything they shouldn't be. So the next thing we're going to have to do is going over here to these connectors. I'm going to have to make something up for the power. It would be these two here, and I'm assuming this is where the video goes. I'm guessing that's the only other place. So that's probably the video output there, which I'll have to try to find a clip or something that I can put on that. I don't think I have anything that clips into these, especially these ones here as well. And these might be the sound. Maybe the sound is one of those. I'll have to double check on that too. But next thing is power, video, and one of these two here with sound. And then we'll be able to plug it in and test it. So for the next steps here to get this board up and running, I'm going to have to create a power connector for this one. I don't have one specifically for this board. I do have one for my rail chase board, but I want to have an independent one here so I don't have to swap them back and forth. So I've got quite a bit of parts here that I've accumulated over the years, some pins. This is for a Sega JVS, Sega Naomi, and whatnot. The pins on the board itself, it needs 5 pins, so I'm going to take 5 here from the right and then 5 from the left, and I'll chop out the middle. And then that should be a pretty good solid piece that we can use. I'll probably shave down the top here a little bit, but I have the pins for that. I have some cable here. This is some old remnants of different cable I've accumulated over the years. So I'll try to make a power cable for that, and then once I get done with that, I'll also create the one for the video output and the controls. But first step here is to try and get this thing cut down and then wired up, and we'll see how that works out. But I'll see you in a bit. Now that we have our clip here cut to the length that we need, 5 pins and 5 pins, and we have our wires here with our pins connected to them, we can get everything connected up here and try to test this out. Hopefully with the power connectors, these will fit in a little bit easily, much better than just putting the pins in directly like so. We'll put them in the clips here, and that should make a nice fit. So the next step we have to do is put these in the right spots and then test it out. These are the two wire looms that I've made up here. I've put a little bit of some red paint on the top just so that I don't change the orientation accidentally and plug this in backwards. But this is the top here for the top board, and this is for the bottom board, and the white will be the negative, yellow is +5. It's really interesting that Sega used yellow for +5, as most JAMA harnesses use yellow as +12, so it can be confusing, especially if you're new to the hardware. But yeah, we've got these two looms here made up. I still need to make the RGB sync loom, and I need to make the pinouts for the rest of the triggers and whatnot, but we're getting there. Well, here's what I've come up with. This is a very crude solution, but I'm hoping that it'll at least work out to the point where I can test it and see what comes out on the screen. These are the power connectors that I've put on here. I've kind of put a little bit of a red mark on top of them to make sure that I don't cross them or I don't flip them upside down. And I didn't have a clip here for the RGB sync. And another thing that I noticed is, according to the schematics, it's red, green, blue, and then it goes sync ground, but with this connector it was ground sync, so I had to do some splicing in there. I didn't have the connectors, the correct connectors for the audio, so I've basically got these clips on here for this, kind of routed to the good old classic speakers here. And yeah, it's essentially ready to go. I don't know how this is going to work or what's going to happen, but as always, I suppose we'll go ahead here, turn off the light a little bit, and let's pop this on and check some of that. Okay, well, we're getting something. It says insert coins only. It's just flashing insert coins. Huh. Okay, so, well, it's better than nothing, that's for sure. Let's see, does it change if we... I took a look online and I was able to come across a page that had some decrypted ROMs, and I'm not sure if these are going to work or not, but I've made these ones up here and I've installed them. I haven't turned this thing on yet, but I figured we could go ahead and give that a shot. So let's go ahead and pop this on and check some of that. Okay, so we've got the same problem here going on. Nothing different, just that insert coins thing. So, well, really kind of comes down to this RAM over here, and it doesn't look so pretty. It looks like we're going to have to go ahead and remove that, try to put in some sockets, or maybe some header pins might be better, just looking at the way that the pads are, and then go from there. But yeah, that didn't seem to change very much. So next thing we're going to do is take this apart and then try to unbodge this bodge wire mess here, and then try and get something in there that'll actually work. I don't know if you'll be able to see inside there. It's really quite tricky, but there are quite a few scratch traces under there. This is not going to be the easiest, that's for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this top board off, and then we'll do some clipping and removing and hopefully get this thing running. As I had mentioned before, probably the best way to go about this is to try to remove each one of these legs here one by one. But before we do that, I think what I'm going to do is just remove some of these jumper wires. These are obviously not making a good contact from either the bottom or the top. I'm not sure, or possibly both. But once again, the problem with these repair jobs, especially with the RAM, is that if they aren't socketed or they aren't taken out very cleanly, if you try and take them out multiple times, you'll rip pads, or even the first time you might wind up ripping the pads, just because there's so much heat that's needed to take out these ICs. Using a pair of side cutters is kind of my tool of choice. And then what we do is I'll go along each one of these pins here and just kind of pop the legs out. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this. I'm kind of doing this on an angle, but I'm just going to clip the legs from the top here. Obviously, there is a chance that this RAM is still good, but because of the damage to the bottom of the traces here, if I were to try to desolder these again as a whole, I'm probably looking at destroying what's left of the traces on the board. So this is just the only option here. And you'll notice that there are quite a few of these Toshiba RAM chips here, SRAM chips on the board, and those are notorious for dying out, burning out. So the thing about these is almost better to replace all of them, or as many of them as you can when you have the chance. That way you don't have to go back and do it later on. But yeah, just a simple kind of clipping motion here, trying to get as much of the top of this as I can, and then just kind of pulling forward. And then what we'll do is we'll flip the board around on the other side, and then I'll get those other legs there. But you can see this is what the RAM chips are looking like. So all of the legs will be gone there. So I'm going to flip this board around, try and cut the rest of this out. Then we'll remove the legs one by one, try and clean up the area, look for broken traces, and go from there. So now that I have those RAM chips here removed, you can see these are the remnants of the legs. And the next step we're going to do is try to apply some flux just to make sure that the legs don't stick. I'm going to go over all these pins here, try and get the inside as well. And that way, hopefully, when we go to pull these out, they'll come out a little bit smoother. And there's no specific side we're going to go with first or not. Usually the corner pins are going to be the hardest ones to take out because they require the most amount of heat. So I usually keep those ones until the end. Usually it's this one here, and it's the one on the corner. It'll be your VCC and VSS, or your power and your ground. Those are going to be the two hardest ones to pull out. And this can be a little bit time consuming, but once you get done with it, it's really a lot easier to clean each one of the holes and make sure that you get all the remnants out without damaging any traces, especially on the top or the bottom. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can get multiple ones at the same time. You can kind of like stack them up in your tweezers here, but yeah, this is what we're dealing with here. Like this, you can just kind of like ball them up here, just keep going one by one. By the end, you'll just have this huge clump of legs. But it works as well. Sometimes you got to be careful, because if you get one of these ground planes that's kind of hidden in the middle, you'll be like, why can't I get that out? It's stuck. And sometimes if it gets too big of a mess here, it's hard to get rid of the whole clump. Or it'll stick to itself like there. There you go. And we'll just dump that off the side. But so far I can see a couple of traces that look slightly iffy here, and I think those may be the ones that couldn't be seen from the bottom. The bottom looks really rough. The top one is a little bit more difficult to tell because of the hidden parts here. Let's add a little bit of solder to this. You can see there, now it'll come out a little bit easier. But yeah, this is essentially how I go about removing these, and it makes a world of difference. But if you don't have the replacement parts and you don't know if this is actually the problem or not, it may be a bit of a waste. And I mentioned before that these RAM chips are extremely flaky. They do fall apart quite easily and internally burn out, so usually, more often than not, you wind up replacing these. Yeah, I can already see a via that has been torn, or a whole pad that's been torn out in the middle there. And that's probably the one, the address line that we saw earlier. That was, you can maybe see right here. These two here, these are all pulled out. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, but we're going to have to try and see what we can do about patching those. So grab a couple of pieces of NAR wire and try to run those as jumpers as cleanly as possible. That way you can't really notice it. But we'll do it maybe on the top. So after cleaning up the bottom part of the board and testing each one of these traces, I found that the bottom part was actually okay. The top part, however, you may notice that there are 3 of these pads here that are completely ripped out. One thing that you probably can't notice is that these traces here that are going from these address lines in this RAM, they also connect to these address lines, but then they also go over here to these EEPROMs. So although 3 of these wires were jumped from here to here, nothing was being jumped from here to the actual EEPROM. So they weren't getting any data. One of those was the, output enable pin, and the other ones were data pins. And there's actually 4 of these that are ripped out instead of 3. So I need to patch from here to here. And I'm going to put a small patch wire here from here to here. And in kind of with these 4, I'm going to try and make those consistent. And then once we get all that done, this should be a lot better. At least we'll know that it's accessing these ROMs, because as it is right now, the furthest it was going was address lines from here to here and just bouncing back and forth. There was nothing going to these EEPROMs. So I need to try and make some wires to try and fit these missing pads and missing places, and then we'll put in some sockets and see how that works. And this is what it looks like with our 4 patch wires, or I should say 6 patch wires. Maybe a little bit difficult to tell, but these wires here are run through the center, and then I have another wire here that's twisted around it and running out from each one of these, including this one over here. So those should fix all of our address line issues. The next thing I'm going to do is put in the sockets one by one, make sure that we keep consistent continuity with these EEPROMs up here, and then if everything goes well, then we'll try and hunt down some RAM and then test things out. And here's what it looks like with the replacement RAM in. I've put the 2 sockets in here. These are the 2 that we replaced. Unfortunately, I don't know if the RAM that I have in here is good or not. This is also some parts RAM, because I don't have this exact kind. But at least we'll be able to test it and see if we get anything different. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pop this on and check some of that. Okay. Oh, maybe it's not enough power? The Sega logo's there. Let me turn this off and see. Maybe we don't have enough power. Let me try to increase the power and we'll check that. Okay, so I've upped the power a little bit. I don't know exactly how much, but let's see if that changes anything. Seems a bit more stable. Huh, but this time the Sega logo's not there. Oh, wild. Oh, there we go. Maybe it's this RAM? Oh, it was just the RAM. Nice! Oh, it is it looks like it's this RAM. This RAM chip doesn't seem to be doing so well. And the color palette is not right at all. Somehow something is up with this RAM here. Okay, I'm gonna have to try to figure something out, but this RAM, it seems like it's intermittently working. But let me get on that. So doing a bit of research on this board, I found that these particular EEPROMs with these numbers on them coincide to a ROM set that did not have that encrypted CPU. This is the exact way it normally comes. So this doesn't need to be decrypted. It should already be working. But as you could see before, there's definitely an issue with this game not starting. One thing I did find out is that I flipped all of the dip switches up to on dip switch A. So to put it into free play mode, now when I do this, you can hear the music is playing, and it will sit here until it counts down. Probably be hard to hear. The sound is really, really good. It's really smooth. Sounds great. But it takes a couple of seconds here for this to... Yeah, now you can see it's kind of doing some wild stuff. Before, what this would do is it would start counting down, and then it would go into the game. I wonder if it's going to start counting down. Doesn't appear to be counting down at all this time. That's kind of wild. Let's see. There we go. I can kind of get it to start. You can see the resolution's off on it. But the music is playing. And it comes up to this. And then it jumps back here. And it'll do its countdown again. And then it'll continuously keep doing this for some reason. I'm not able to get into the test mode at all. It doesn't seem to be responding to any of the controls. And it could be the fact that there was a lot of those pins that were bent. And those bent pins may be something shorted out. Okay, so doing a bit of experimenting here, you'll notice that I took out all 4 of these EEPROMs. This is apparently the sub-CPU, and this is the main CPU, according to the instructions, or according to the manual. So when I turn this on, regardless, this still comes up, and the game will pretty much do the same thing without those EEPROMs in there. So it's almost like it's not even acknowledging that those EEPROMs are the correct ones. So I think we may have a bit of a difference with ROMs. You'll see it came back here to the beginning, but I think there may be a problem with these ROMs here. So they're probably from a different set or something. But yeah, this is just not kicking in, not doing anything. It does the exact same thing with all the EEPROMs gone. So let me see if I can find the correct EEPROMs, and maybe we can get this thing to run. So after a bit more of a thorough inspection here, I started going back over these EEPROMs, thinking that there might be something wrong with those. And I was double checking my work on the RAM, and just to make sure that those were okay. Everything here seemed to be all right, except one thing that I noticed while I was testing, and that is on pin number 4 here. It was making a good contact all the way across here. But then I noticed that if I slightly touched this EEPROM here, it would lose contact. And when I looked at the bottom, the pin on the inside here was actually broken. So it was making a contact, but if you slightly just pushed it a little bit, it would lose contact. So I replaced the pin here so it would make contact across all of these points here for the address lines. And now, if we turn this thing on, we've got our sound. I've tried to adjust the monitor a little bit more. We'll let it count down. I don't have any of the controls wired up, but It's a pretty cool song here. Like, this is where it would normally reset, and now we have the game running. Obviously, like I said, there aren't any controls for it, but it is working. So we can say that we have successfully saved another arcade PCB here from the grave, and an awesome one at that. But hopefully you enjoyed this little journey into repairing a Super Hang-On here, one of Sega's classics. Obviously you're just going to see crashing left and right, but good times. But yeah, I'm really glad to be able to have this thing back up and running again. So I'll need to do a few more things to button it back up, but yeah, it's alive. But if you stuck on this long, then fantastic. Like always, I'll put up another video here soon, so thanks for watching. Watching the same screen here 2 times in a row. Or maybe 3 times. This is probably the 3rd time now. But really awesome. Let me see if we can, let's turn this one off. And if you put all of the dip switches up here, it goes into free play mode. So if we put them all back down again, it should, hypothetically, maybe one time it will go back to the same screen it was on. But then after that, it should go to the main title screen. Yeah, so it'll do this at least one more time, and then after that it'll go back to the title screen. But some interesting things if you're in the same kind of predicament, having some difficulties with Hang-On working or not working. This is the sub-CPU section, and these are the RAM that power both of these. This is the main CPU, so without this, nothing will work. But without the EEPROMs here, it should still kind of turn on. We'll just let it go through one more time. Don't have to watch it too much, but you can listen to the music in the background while I explain some things. Other things that I looked online and was able to kind of find out is this, what is it? 74LS244 also has a tendency on going bad. And this IC over here is one that basically tells the machine to boot or not. So it's a kind of independent CPU from the rest of the game. If this goes bad, then this will not run the program. So something else to look at. As I mentioned before, there's so many of these Toshiba RAMs on here. Not the best, but I guess we'll just have to go with it, go with the flow here. There we go, this one's done. Now it should boot back to the beginning, hopefully, if everything is working correctly. But yeah, just a couple of, address lines make the biggest difference, especially with these arcade boards. And there we go, we've got our title back here. And then it should go into demo mode, not reboot. Yeah, there we go. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you here on the next one.